It's always a schus for me visiting any community in the world to speak to the koilel. The koilel is the neshama of every kehillah b'Yisrael, and speaking to the Bnei Torah is a schus and a privilege and a mission, a shlichus. And I heard so much about this amazing koilel. So first of all, a brucha to the Rosh Koilel. It should be benekel and shetis kol hagel Torah uladira for many, many years to come. Ad bias goyel tzedek. So a half a koilel is learning Yevomis and a half a koilel is learning Niddah. So what am I supposed to talk about? And I think when I have an opportunity to speak to a koilel, so in Eretz Yisrael I give shiurim kivuim in many koilelim. So I follow the progress of the koilel, but if I have an opportunity to speak to a koilel once, and I don't know when I'll be here again, so I prefer speaking about a general inyan that'll be a to'eles in many sugyas, in Hilchas Niddah in particular, but not only in Hilchas Niddah. And what I want to speak about today is kulas v'chumres, especially in Hilchas Niddah, and not only in Hilchas Niddah, but generally. When are we supposed to be mekel? When are we supposed to be machmir? And what do we learn from the poskim starting off with Hilchas Niddah? So we will touch upon 10 sources, the first 5 or 6 in Hilchas Niddah, and then some other sources. So I don't know where you're holding in Hilchas Niddah, but Siman Kuf Pei Hey Siv Gimel, we learn the din of Shavya Anaf Shechaticha Desira and Amasla. And then, after a while, she says, Tahira ani. And her husband is taken aback, and he asks, didn't you say you're Tameya? And she gives an amasla. Lo yehoyu bi koyach letashmish, she's ne'menes. Kach mavor, kuf pei hesiv gimel. And the Namu writes, but if he doesn't want to believe her, it is a midas chasidus. So even though she is ne'menes, and api alochi you could trust her, and she has nemonis to say, what I said, I didn't mean seriously, and she explains why she said to Meyoni, she's ne'menes, and nevertheless the Nemo says, midas chasidus lahachmir. And that is based on the story in Ksubas Chav Beis. Ksubas Chav Beis is the central sugya about Shavya Nafshech Chaticha Desira. Isha Shamro Eishes Ishani, or Tameya Ani. And the Gemara tells the story of Rav and Shmuel. Rav was Machadish, Imnos Namasla Deveo Nemenes. Shmuel, Tonamenei Arboim Zimna, he has it over 40 times. V'yafra Biken, Loi Oved Uvde Benafshei. He was Machmir. And the Ramo takes out of this story that a Machmir, Midas Chasidus V'yodoi, V'tovoi Olav Brocha. The Beis Yosef doesn't bring this Machmir Midas Chasidus, neither does the Rambam. And why not? The same story is told in Yerushalmi, Yud Gimel Amud Aleph Masechet Ksubis, but the Yerushalmi we do not find that Shmuel Achmir Anafshei. That is only told in Bavli and not in Yerushalmi. It's not reasonable to assume that it's a Machloikes Bavli and Yerushalmi. Was it 2 different stories? So maybe the Rambam learned from the Yerushalmi that this is not a halacha. Maybe Shmuel midas chasidus mufleges, but it's not for other people. Maybe in Shmuel's case, it was agreeable to his wife. Maybe Shmuel had a reason not to believe her. We don't know. Ein lemeid halacha min ha'maisa. So the Rambam writes, Machmir midas chasidus biyodoi. Narely poshut, midas chasidus, if he really has some level of doubt, but it's not a midas chasidus to lie, and it's not a midas chasidus if he is convinced that she is saying the truth. There is no midas chasidus to be machmir. Midas chasidus is when a person has a level of doubt, even though he could rely on what she says, like edechod ne'eman b'yisurin. Midas chasidus lahachmir. So we find here one source that afar pisha lafi halacha mutar, person has the right to be machmir. Ksomim, could a person be machmir? Poches mikigris. When Chazal say ksomim tohirim. Halachas Ketanas Chelik Beis Simachov Beis, quoted by many Achronim, Ein lahachmir. So there's a huge discussion, Bisman Hazeh, is there room to be machmir puchas megris? Because the macholis and the kilim in our time are far smaller, obviously, than they were once upon a time. And it is very unlikely that a macholis would have dam as big as a gris. This is what Chachamim were geyser, and they are puchas megris, ein lahachmir. And that's halachas ketanes agreed upon by all the later Achronim. Hayotze l'derech chayav lifkoi des ishtoi, kuf pei dalid, sif yud. The Rama writes, chayav lifkoi des ishtoi, afilu betashmesh, v'amachmir tovoi olav brocha. Amachmir tovoi olav brocha, even though chayav lifkoi es ishtoi. The source of this halach is the smag, mitzvah kuf yud aleph. The Marshal has a biur on the smag, and the Marshal wonders if Chazal would say mitzvah lifkoi des ishtoi, we could understand and appreciate a machmir tovei olav brocha. But if Chazal say chayev lifkoi des ishtoi, how could a person be machmir keneged a chiyuv? So the Mashal wonders, how could this be a machmir tovei olav brocha when Chazal say chayev lifkoi es ishtoi? So the Mashal has an interessante pshat in the smag, and he says, "Hamachmir shaloi lotzeis laderech tovei olav brocha." If you're yoytze laderech chayev lifkoi des ishtoi, and you have no permission to be machmir, this is a chiyuv of oino. Hamachmir shaloi lotzeis laderech. Is it that important? We're talking about Somach Levest. The Milsa de Pshita, I didn't mention that. Hayoytze l'derech Somach Levest. So even though there's a chiyuv of Prisha Somach Levest, by Yoytze l'derech, we are Mekel even Tashmich Somach Levest. And on this halacha the Rama writes, Machmir Olav brocha, because there's a din of Prisha Somach Levest, and the Marshal disagrees. If the din is chayav lifkoi des ishtoi, afilu samach levesta, we're not choishish l'prisha samach levesta. How could one be machmir? The Marshal says, "Machmir shalosh etzes derech." And the Torah says, "Shlomim," on the spot in Simekuf Pei Daled says, "B'mokom efshar tzorach lenoig k'maharshal." So there's a machlokes Rav and Shmuel nidet ezayin. Vestes dioraiso, vestes v'rabbonon. The noide biyude ki yadua holds that even a vestes derabonon prisha somach levesta is dioraisa. Ein chazoka lahabo. But in all the poskim is mashma, in vestes derabonon prisha somach levesta is also derabonon. It's not mena Torah. So the Rama writes a machmir tovei olav brocha. The Marshal disagrees. So this is another example, another source, another makor of in Hilchas Nida one has the right to be machmir, afal pisha ikaradin lekula. An interesting machlokes in Achronim, bias mitzvah, chosen vekala, samach levest, mutar or osa. Noide biyuda madura tinyona yoredea kuf yud zayin says,
is handling two sheets are the rice carbon. The Isaac Stein on the smog there says that the chakir the smog is, there should be machal if it's the rice and not be like it's on the last.
I didn't hear well.
The smog, two stolen pashtas, he brings out two stolen, one's about to do a kama, one's about to do a basra.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one pashtas the vestas are the rice, the second sheet is that it's the rice, so that's what you should be machmer. And Isaac Stein on the smog writes that the reason why you should be machmer is because vestas are the rice.
Even though the halacha is vestes derabonon.
He's not sure. It's complex for sharing. They say it's the shit so they say.
Okay.
The first one was a rule on the sharing that it's really the rice, not based on the little fun.
Okay. As I said, l'choyle, this question is diurais or derabonon. The Noida B'Yehuda says even if vestes derabonon, prisha somach vestes diurais, and that is agreed upon by the Chassam Sofer as well as the Noida B'Yehuda.
In prisha somach vestes. Yeah.
Yeah. Bias mitzvah, Noide B'Yehuda, Tinyona, Kuf Yud Zayin, and Reb Shloime Kluger, Tuv Tam V'das, Madura Gimel Chelik Beis, Simen Sameches, both say that even Bias Mitzvah, Sumach Levest, Osur, and the Hamakna Mesechet Kedushin, at the end of the Sefer Hamakna and Kedushin, there's a Kunza Sachlan, and Hilchas Kedushin, and Simen Samech Aleph writes, Bias Mitzvah is a greater chiyuv than Yoitzer Derech. And if Yoitzer Derech, it's mutar. Bias Mitzvah definitely should be mutar. But then the question would be, would the Ramoba Bias Mitzvah also say, Amachma Otove Olav Brocha? Or maybe by Bias Mitzvah, according to the Sefer HaMakna, that it's a greater chiyuv than Yoitzer Derech. Everybody would agree that there is no Mokum L'chomra like Shittas HaMaharshal. So we have two sources, Beine Tayim, even if Me'ikar Adin Mutar, Amachmir, Tavoy, Olav, Brocha. Trumas Tadashan Simen Reish Mem Vav, that the Shulchan Aruch and the B'Sheisif and all bring, Isho Shehergisha, and she did a Bedike, and she found nothing, Tzorech Lahachmir. Rabbi Yankov Emden, Shilas Yavetz, Chelik Beis Simen Hey, wonders, how could one be machmir, bebitul pri orvio? Yeshua v'nunena shebitul es Yisrael lailo echod me pri orvio. So the Shilas Yavetz disagrees. And he writes that the Chumer of Trumas Hadeshen has no source in Chazal. So the Shilas Yavetz, Rabbi Yankov Emden, is one of the very few achronim that dares to disagree with the Shoinim and with the Shulchan Aruch. Don't know whether you're familiar with the Shilas Yavetz. Chelik Beis, Shalos Tshuva Shilas Yavetz Simen Chof. He writes, Shomati ma'ovi moiri, the Chacham Tzvi, Sheshama ben Baal Chelkas Mechoikak an Even HaEzer, She'ein ra'ui la'odam, Lahoires Heroa b'Yisrael, Elo imken b'yodoi Lakor velim choiksif min HaShulchan Aruch. That's an interesting criteria to get heter ha'ira. I never heard of it. And he writes, Shumati ma'ovi moiri de Chacham Tzvi, sheshomem b'bal chelkas mechoykek. Ein ra'ui la'odem lahoris ha'roa b'Yisrael, elo imken b'yodoi lakor velim choiksif min HaShulchan Aruch. And then he writes by Novi Yisera, I didn't do this only once or twice. He writes, Pam or Pamayim, I did it, but I don't want to start with the Shulchan Aruch. So here, he disagrees with the Trumas Hadeshen, and he says, Botka v'loi motzo, pishpesh v'loi motzo, muteres labala, and she doesn't need to be choishish. Maybe there was a tippus dam that was nevad. But his argument is, neged mitzvahs pri urvia, ein lahachmer chumr yisera. Chuvas Chesam Sofer Yoredes Makuf Mem Test. Chesam Sofer deals with a situation in which a person had a kesem, nishal chachamim, and the chachamim was matir. But liboy noikfoi, he feels that maybe the Moirerua didn't give a good psak, and he wants to be machmir. Does he have reshus to be machmir when he got a psak hayroas chacham lekulo? And the Chesam Sofer writes, yes, he has reshus to be mekel, and he writes an interesting svara. Any girl, any woman that marries a ben Torah, that marries a from person, takes into account that he's going to be moise v'hoilach. It's soon Chanukah. Moise v'hoilach, malam b'kodesh. And even if at the time he wasn't so from, but she has no right to object if he wants to be machmir, because she married a Talmud Chacham, a ben Torah from person, and therefore he has a right to be machmir. And the Chesam Sofer only deals with one aspect of the question: does he have a right to deprive his wife from mitzvahs oina because he wants to be machmir? That a person has the right to be machmir if he feels that maybe the Moirerua had a mistake. So I have an argument with some Gedolim in Yerushalayim and some poskim of our time. Does this halacha apply to Balei Tshuva as well? Because Chesam Sofer writes, you married a from person, you took into account that if he's from, he's probably going to get from her. We wish he's going to get from her because Malam B'Kodesh V'Lo Meridin. So what is the halacha regarding Baal Tshuva? When she married him, he wasn't from at all. And does he still have a right, if they both did tshuva together, to be machmir al atzmoi? And I say, why would it depend on their agreement b'shas nisuin? And when they did tshuva, Shirov took into account that if he's a Baal Tshuva, he definitely might become from her. You know, Baal Tshuva are usually faster on the from path than those that were born from. So I don't think it depends dafka on shas nisuin. Monetary obligations depend on shas nisuin. Hamakadosh esu ishol menashe en achalai shai ksus v'oino. A machloikis, is it valid or not? But after kiddushin v'nisuin, one definitely can't make any tanai like this. But I think in Yodim Sheben Odom Lamokoyim and in Yodim Sheben Ish Lishta, it does not depend what he was b'shas nisuin. You did tshuva, you understand, he has the right to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to be machmir. The Chassam Sofer says one could be machmir. The Pischei Tshuva quotes the Chassam Sofer twice. Generally speaking, in Hilchos Neder and in all other areas of Torah, should one be machmir or mekel? This is an interesting Sefer Shalas Tshuvas.
He always uses the same law. How can he decide that now the Rav made a mistake? He's trusting in the past 10 times and the next 10 times.
The Chassam Sofer doesn't deal with the details, with the particulars. It's just that if he always asks or not, but I don't think it will make a difference. Im liboy noikfoy, and he feels maybe the Rav made a mistake, he has the right to be machmir. In practicality, I think, if he's an amoritz or a newlywed, a new younger man, and he has no experience whatsoever in matters, he definitely should rely on his Rav. But if he has experience, and he thinks this time around the Rav might have made a mistake, shkiyos miyovin, he has the right to be machmir. The Chiddush in the Chassam Sofer seems to be that even though he is mishuabad leishtoi, he still has the right to be machmir. So the Chassam... Why are you asking? I mean, is that darkoi shalaylam? A person has a question, he goes to his Rav, and he always relies on his Rav. But this time around, he has a feeling he doesn't feel comfortable. He thinks his Rav might have made a mistake. He looks at the matter, and based on his experience, this should be also. That is the situation the Chassam Sofer deals with. And the Chassam Sofer seems to be totally comfortable with, if he wants to be machmir, he has the right to be machmir. And what the Chassam Sofer deals with is, do I have a right to be machmir at the expense of my wife? Because and that is what the Chassam Sofer deals with. But he doesn't seem to have any question that he has the right to be machmir if his feeling is that the Rav might have made a mistake. Everybody could make a mistake. So finally, generally in Hilchos Neder, whether we're dealing with an individual or with a Rav, do we need to try to be mekel or machmir? Shalish Tshuva Siach Yitzchak, one of the Choshev Rabbonim in Hungary, Rabbi Yitzchak Weiss was his name, he was the Rav in Verbo, and in Siman Tov Tez Zayin in his Sefer he writes, Shomati b'shem hanoide b'Yehuda. I looked for it and I didn't find, but I heard in the name of the Noide b'Yehuda, the Gemara in Brochas Daf Dalet says, David HaMelech mishtabeach, Yodai melech lochis b'shviru v'shilyo letayer ishu le'alo. So the Noide b'Yehuda was medayik. The Gemara doesn't say that David HaMelech says, Yodai melech lochis b'shviru v'shilyo im letayer ishu le'alo, but rather, letayer ishu le'alo. And the Noide b'Yehuda was medayik. That is our duty as Rabbonim, as Moira Hayroah. Yodem alachlochas v'shviru v'shilyo letayer isho lebala. Not to decide letayer or letame. The migama, we need to strive, look for kulas letayer isho lebala. And because there's a mitzvah of a shovas aveda, I want to give the aveda back to the Rabbi Yitzchak Weiss Yitzchak didn't find an Oide B'Yehuda. It is an Oide B'Yehuda Madura Kama Yoredei Mem Gimel. He writes, I looked for it in Tzlach and Brochus, and I have no idea why did he look for it in Tzlach and Brochus. You didn't look in the right place. I don't know why Tzlach and Brochus. Well, the Gemara is in Brochus of Dalet, and on the spot there is no Tzlach about this, but it is in Oide B'Yehuda Madura Kami Yoredei Mem Gimel, and he has that diuk. And before the Oide B'Yehuda, it's in Shlo. Shlo, Mesechet Shavuos, Ner Mitzvah, Ois Tzadik. The Shlo is Medayik v'Divra Gemara. David HaMelech says, I am Toreach. Yod HaMelech Loches b'Shura v'Shil Yelatayri Shalabala, and the Tafka of Amora Roa is to turn over every stone and look for Kulis Letayr Isho Labala. So that's the Shlo, that's the Oide B'Yehuda, and once again, She'ilas Yavitz, Chelak Aleph, Semenun Daled, and all have this diuk in the Gemara. Shuvas Yankev Chelik Beis Semen Ayin Vav, Shuvas Chesam Soifa Kuf Ayin Vav, and all these Gedolim are madgish, especially in Hilchas Nida. Mishum Priya Orvio, Mishum Shlom Bayis, we need to be Toreach, to be Mekel, as we find in all these sources in Gedoyle Apoiskim Meledoro Yisayim. There's a Shachan Semen Kuf Tzadek Ches, in Dinei Chatzitza B'Tfila. And the Shach deals with the question, a woman that needs help. She's handicapped and she needs help with Tfila. So another woman goes into the mikveh together with her and she holds on to her to help her be toivel. And the Shach quotes, I think, the Issa V'Heter or some other Kadmoin, that even a Chatchila, if the woman that is helping, if her hands already became wet memei ha-mikveh, and that is a din, it's a Mishnah Masechet Mikvois, Mayim Magadimin. And if she wetted her hands b'mei ha-mikveh, then she could hold on to the other lady, even b'shtas tefillah, and she doesn't need to let go. And the Shach disagrees, and the Shach writes, Kama chumre she'onu noyagem behilchas nida, shelo min adin. And definitely we should be machmer here, even though b'di'eved, I agree that it's not a chitzitza, but why be mekel a kula? And if by chance, so we'll have a Yoredei here, I'll check the lashon of the Shach and Semakuf Tzadikhes. The Shach writes, we are machmer many chumras in Hilchas Nida, above and beyond what basic halacha requires, so why would we be mekel here? So this Shach seems to indicate Hefech HaDvorim, that a dafka in Hilchas Nida, we should be machmir more than in other areas. And the Shach writes, many chumras we are noig b'Hilchas Nida shalom and adin, and therefore we should be machmir here as well. Lebi oimeli lechatchila. The Shach agrees that b'di'eved be no chatzitza. Kosev Adrisha, Sif Cotton, Lamed Vov, Shach Semakuf Tzadik Ches. Kosev Adrisha, Mekan yesh heter gomor, shebesha sho ishet toiveles, v'chaver to dochafa b'mayim, שיכול ללחוס בו ביודו בשעס דחיפה אם הדיחו יודעו במים תחילו, ואין צורך להפריד יודע ממנו. ולא כמו שנוי הגינה שדידן שמפרידן יודעים בשעס דחיפה. That's the דרישה. לפי הנהסדת יועץ השח, אין להוירס קילה בדבורים, שנהגו איסו. דהלו, במשנה ופויסקים, אינו אלא בדיעבד שורי. אבל לכתחילה, מן לימרן, ואויד. This is the line I quoted. דבכמה וכמה דבורים מחמירים לענייני דשלום הנדין, אפילו בדיעבד, כל שכן הוכה. So the Shach writes, וכמה וכמה דבורים אונים מחמירים לענייני דשלום הנדין. So are we supposed to look for kulas or look for chumras? When the question is, letayr isho lebalo, the question of maris domim. When the question is letayr isho lebala, could she go to the mikveh or not? Is she mutar or not? Then we should be mekel. But in hilchas chatzitza, especially when we're dealing with the lechetchila b'mokem de'efshar, כמה וכמה דבורים שאנו מחמירים בהלכס נדר. On one hand, we're dealing with a Isser Koros and Kedushas Yisrael, so we should be machmir. But when the question is a Tayrish Alabala, then the Poskim have an Atiyah Lahokal, as I quoted from the many sources that I quoted before. And now I want to go over to other sugyas in Shas. When Chazal say Koichet dehetera odif, and many times I explain to my Talmidim, Koichet dehetera odif is not the same concept as Ein gozrin gzera al tzibur elu ken roi v'tzibur yecholen la'amad boi. Those are two different things. Koichet dehetera odif is el-lechatchila. Rashi and Beitza explains Koichet dehetera odif because it's harder to be a mekel than to be a machmir. It's very easy to be a machmir. If you don't know, you're machmir. But in order to be mekel, you need to be boki b'halacha. But the poskim quote koichet de'etera odef as a general rule in halacha. There's an interesting vikuach between two gedolei olam. Is there a mukim to be machmir, not to rely on bittul berav? Nevela fell into a pot. We know there's nevela in this pot. But it's bottle b'sheshim. We have 3 apples. One is orla, and it's an Isra Hanoah. And this apple of orla got mixed into 2 other apples that are not orla. Person feels extremely uncomfortable eating all 3 apples. I'm eating orla. Feels uncomfortable eating a dish, a chont, when he knows there's nevela in this chont, but it's bottle b'shishim. Isra v'eta klal nun zayin, Siv Tezvav writes at the Midas Chasidus. Pischei Tshuva, Kuf Tezayin, Yoradea Siv Kot Niud, quotes Soilas Lemincha. The Soilas Lemincha is the Minchas Yankov. Shavus Yankov. One of the Chosevs the Poiskim in Shulchan Aruch. Soilas Lemincha quoting Teres HaOsham and Teres Chatas. Teres HaOsham is the Teisves Yomtev, his Sefer on Teres Chatas. And he writes, if a person doesn't want to be Soimech al Bikr Barav, it is Kemoi Apikorsus. That's his lotion. Kemoi Apikorsus. If the Torah says it's mutar, what do you mean you want to be machmir? You're not mufrumer than Chachomim, you're frumer than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bittul Barav is a din diuraisa. We learn it from Achrei Rabem Lahatos. You feel uncomfortable eating nevela or eating orla, then Kamor Apikorsis, and that Pischei Tshuva quotes it. We know from the Chazon Ish that the Pischei Tshuva is not only a malakad but a poisik. But we don't even need the Pischei Tshuva because it's the Toises Yomtev and it's the Shavus Yankov and Minchas Yankov. And they write, you cannot be machmir by bittul berav. But on the other hand, Dovish yesh lo metirin lo bottle. And Rashi and Beis Dav Gimel Amid Beis explains why Dovish yesh lo metirin lo bottle at shetachlena beisa tachlena beheter. So what do you mean at shetachlena beisa? There is no isa. So if Chazal say Dovish yesh lo metirin ein lo bottle, but at shetachlena beisa tachlena beheter, that means potentially there is isa. So we're not learning Hilchas Teruvis now, and I don't have enough time to go into the sug of Dovish yesh lo metirin, but I don't think it's a stira. Dovish yesh lo metirin is a din derabonon. Ma she'amru amru, ma she'tiknu tiknu, ma she'lo tiknu lo tiknu. And if it's bottle barav, and it's a dovish she'ein lo metirin, one should never be machmir. And if he's machmir, kemoy apikorsus, that's what the Pischei Tshuva quotes from the Soros HaMincha, from the Toises Yomtev in Teres HaOsham. I say for on the Teres Chatas, which is an interesting machlokes. Rambam Kedusha is a Rambam right in this room. Rambam Kedusha in Hilchas Macholas Asuros. There's an interesting Loshen Rambam that we do not find anywhere else. Perek Yud Zayin Hilchas Macholas Asuros. Halacha Chov Beis. So the Rambam deals with Shemen Akum, a big sugya in Avodah Zorah, from Chof Tes to Lamed Tes, Macholei Akum, She'asu Chachomim, Stam Yeinom, Pasakim, Bishulakim, Shemen Akum, Perek Yud Zayin, Halacha Chof Beis in Rambam. שמן של גוי מותר, ומי שאסרוי, הרי זה עובר בחטא גדול, מפני שהמרה על פי בית דין שהתירוהו. Nowhere does the Rambam write such an expression. Either it's us or it's mutar. שמן של גוי מותר, מי שאסרוי עובר בחטא גדול, שהמרה על פי בית דין שהתירוהו. The Maggid Mishnah brings, why does the Rambam write this lashon? So in the Zohar Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, the Gemara says that originally they asked Shemen Akum, and Rebbe veBeis Dinoi hitiruho. It's a gzeira shelo niskabel b'rov hatzibur, and Rebbe was matio. That's the way the Zohar Lamed Vav. And Yerushalmi Masechet Shabbos Daf Yud, the Gemara says once again, Rav and Shmuel. We have Rav and Shmuel in the very first source we dealt with today about Amasle Isha She'omer Tomeyani. So Rav and Shmuel had a discussion about Shemen Akum. Rav and Shmuel were the first generation of Amerom, the greatest Ameroim. And Rav was a Talmud of Rabbeinu HaKodesh and Rav Chia. And Rav felt we should be Oiso Noeg Isra B'Shemen Akum. And Shmuel tells Rav, if you're going to be Machmir, I'm going to be Machrez or a Zokin Mamre. So it's not Mamish a din of Zokin Mamre, because Zokin Mamre is only based on Agol Shebi Yerushalayim and Lishkas Agozis. But Shmuel tells Rav, B'derech HaFloga, and Shmuel was younger than Rav, and Shmuel was Kufa for Rav, and Shmuel tells Rav, if you're going to be Machmer against our Rebbe, against Rabbeinu HaKodesh, I'm going to be Machrez or a Zokin Mamre. And that is why the Rambam writes this harsh lashon, Kolo Asroi, Over b'chet gadol shehimra pi based in sheitera, because Shmuel challenged Rav, and Shmuel told Rav, "Are you going to be machmer, zokan mamre?" So, could we learn from this Rambam a general rule that a person cannot be machmir keneged gedol ador keneged based in, or was it just a one-time story between Rav and Shmuel? If it's a one-time story, why does the Rambam bring it? But the Rambam brings it regarding Shemen, and that was the Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. We do not find this anywhere else. So I don't think this could be a general rule, and I also think there's a chilik between chashoshois and gezeiros. And many sources in my Svarim, I differentiate between gezeres and chashoshois. Gezeres chachamim, we know, afal pisha botel atam loy botel hagezero. But in many areas in halacha we find that if botel atam, then the din changes. Gilui. Tosfos writes in Avodah Zorah, whether we're not makbid on gilui, because eina choshim mitzuyim beinenu. We don't have snakes in our homes, definitely not venomous snakes, so we're not makbid on gilui. The Goen is Machmir, the Litvish world is Machmir, but Gilu, but the Shoroch, Paskins, Lekula. The reason we say Gilu is Manazeh. And why don't we say Chazal Aserd, but the din changes if the circumstances change? The same regarding Mayim Achroinim. Toisen Chulin says we're not Makbid on Mayim Achroinim, and that's the Shulchan Aruch. Because Melech's Doimis, Einoi Motzui Beneinu. So when do we say that a Gzeira is intact even though the Tam is bottle? And when do we say Zil Bosar Tama? So I explained there's a difference between Gzeres and Chashoshois. Mayim Achroinim is not a Gzeres, it's not a Takon, it's a Chashash. It's a Chashash of Melech's Doimis that'll hurt your eyes. Gilui is not a Gzeres, it's not a Takon, it's a Chashash. Eres Nechoshem might cause death. So when we're dealing with Chashoshois, if the Chashash is no longer reasonable, then the halacha changes. And that is the machloikes Rabbeinu Tam and Beis Yosef regarding ein metapchin ve'ein meragdin. Toisa Beis Daf Lamed brings that we are makel because Rabbeinu Tam says ein ona b'kiyim b'tikun klei Shiur. And the Beis Yosef wonders. It's a Shavuos. Chazal answered, Shavuosim don't change. Rabbeinu Tam learned it's a chashash, not b'derech gezerah. And if the chashash is no longer reasonable, then the din changes. So we're dealing with the gzeira, shemen shel goyim. And if Rebbe was mevatel the gzeira, then the gzeira is bottle. By chashoshes, people have a right maybe to be machmir more, to be machmir less. Is there a chashash? Is there not a chashash? So there's a difference between gzeres and chashoshes bein lekula u bein lechumer. 3 times in Yerushalmi, Trumas Daf Lamed Omid Aleph, Chagig Yeches Omid Aleph, Soita Lamed Daled Omid Beis, we find a Loshen Yerushalmi, Kishem she'osa l'tayer es atomei, kach osa l'tamei es atorio. It's the same. Amita shel Torah is machayev. Ukishem she'osa l'tayer es atomei, kach osa l'tamei es atorio. The Beis Yosef quotes this Yerushalmi in Simakuf Tezvav and Yoredeya, and instead of Tumah v'Tahara, he uses the Lashonis Isur v'Heter. Kishem she'oser lahati es osur, kach oser lesor es heter, kach kosev v'Beis Yosef v'Simen Kuf Tezvav. So I don't really have any klora yesoides when to be machmir, when to be mekel, but I just quoted many sources, 6 sources in Hilchas Nida and some others from Shar Chelkei HaTorah. Generally speaking, in Hilchas Nida, like many Gedolim are medayik, Yodei Melachlochas B'Shvira V'Shilya L'Tayr Ishol Abala. On the other hand, we find Chumras in Hilchas Nida, like the Shachan's Kuf Tzadik Ches that writes Kama Inyonim, that were Machmir Shalom in Adin in Hilchas Nida because of Kedushas Yisrael, and because we're dealing with halachas chamuris that are in Issur Koros. Reb Shlomo Kluger was the Posek Ador in his day and age, 170 years ago, and generally he's a machmir. But there's an amazing Loshen in Shuvas Elef Lochos Shlomo Orechaim Simen Kuf Yud Beis. Reb Shlomo Kluger wrote many, many Sforim, maybe more than almost any other Achron. Each one of his sefer has a different name. Baruch Hashem, B'chaz Shemayim, I wrote 35 Sforim. They all have the same name for a very simple reason. I was afraid I'm going to get old, I won't remember the names of my own Sforim. So I preferred all my Sforim have the same name. At least I should remember my Sforim. So Reb Shlomo Kluger wrote many Sforim. Elef Lochos Shlomo is a unique sefer. 1,000 short tshuvas. Many Sforim, but Reb Shlomo Kluger are sharas tshuvas. Tuftan V'das, Shnois Chaim, many others. Elef Lochos Shlomo is short tshuvas. And it's called Elef Lochos Shlomo because it's 1,000 tshuvas. Actually, it's more than 1,000 tshuvas. He didn't count, or he got confused. And he put together all his short tshuvas. It's about 1,060 plus tshuvas. Or Chaim Kuf Yud Beis. Reb Shlomo Kluger writes, Ani eini noyeg shum dvar chumre yoiser medalas u'am u'mehedyet shebehedyoites. That's what he writes. Eini noyeg shum dvar chumre yoiser medalas u'am u'mehedyet shebehedyoites. והלוואי שיהיה חלקי עם חד מעמד דערה הולך תומים ודל. הלוואי שיהיה חלקי עם חד מערה עמי אורס הולך תומים ודל. And he writes, איני נויג שום חומר יויסה מדלס ועם בהדיית שבדיויטס. Which is an amazing statement from the Godel Ador, from Reb Shlomo Kluger, that was mamish the Poisek Shekol Beis Yisrael Nisha and Olav. One last source that to me is a Tzorach in Godel, and because I know I'm speaking to a Tzibah of Talmidei Chachomim, maybe you will help me out. Could I have a Mishnayos Kalim? Is there a Mishnayos Kalim here with the Meforshim, with the Rosh? Vilna Shas Vilna, Mesechet Nidor, Mesechet Kalim. So there's a Rosh Masechet Kelim, which to me I don't understand what it's about, and I know today probably there are many Svarim on Masechet Kelim, so maybe any of you could find a source that will explain to me Pshat in this Rosh. Kelim Perek Yud. So Kelim is actually the biggest Masechta in Shas, and it has 30 prokim. And the Rishonim are Mechalek Kelim, Mechalek Masechet Kelim, Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basa. Perek Yud Mishnah Aleph Masechet Kelim. We're dealing here with the din of Tzomet Posil, that is Masel Mepnei Atum. I won't go into details because it's not really enough Gemina. But the Rosh writes, Perek Yud Halacha Aleph, dealing with the Machlokes B'Shamai and B'Sila and the din of Tumas Kelim of Tzomet Posel. V'zeh Musar Godol, shemin ha'ra'ui l'chol odem lahachmir, af al pi shehoyu emes lehefech. I don't understand what the Rosh writes. Musar Godol, shemin ha'ra'ui l'kol odem lahachmir, af al pi shehoyu emes lehefech. Is there an Indian Godel Ra'ui Lahachmir Neged Hu Emes? How could one be Machmir Neged Hu Emes? And why would one be Machmir Neged Hu Emes? Emes is Emes. Bein Lakula, Bein Lakumra. What?
Says that you punish from Heter because it's supposed to Israel.
Chazal say Kadesh Atzmachu B'muta Lacha. And the Messiah Yeshua says one should make Gdorim Kedei Leslachik Minu Aveira. But here we're dealing with Halacha. And the Rosh is not in Orches, it's not in Orches Chaim. Tzorach. We need to learn this Sugya. And I would just like if anybody could find one of the Achroinim or anybody dealing with this Rosh and trying to explain the Rosh. Perek Yud, Halacha Aleph, Masechet Kelim. So today we spoke about a very Inyan Kloli, a very klolistic Inyan, v'hafoich ba v'hafoich ba dekula ba, and I'm sure that in such a Choshev HaKoilel you will find many more sources, Minui u'menaichi testayim shmaitza, and if you have any more sources in this Inyan, or Livnais Velistoyer, I'll be very happy to hear from the Choshev Avrechem of this Koilel. שנזכה תמיד להגדיל תורה ולהאדירה.